Welcome to the Birth Lounge Podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts, support your mental health, and learn the tips and tricks that thousands of parents have used to craft their ideal birth. We will answer all of your questions, the scary ones and the weird ones, to help calm your fears and feel confident going into your birth. I'm going to help you redefine what birth and motherhood looks like and how to embrace your journey. I've intentionally crafted a list of experts to help you navigate pregnancy, explore your birth options, and plan for postpartum so that it can be a time of soaking in your tiny human. We're going to go there on all the hard topics so that you can dive deep into finding your confidence and freeing yourself from fears around birth. With over 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I created this podcast as a way to share the resources parents need to make educated and informed decisions about their care in pregnancy and childbirth. This is a birth community driven by evidence-based information and research in hopes to help you explore your options, understand your rights, and know what choices you have along the way when it comes to birth and beyond. I'm your host, HeHe, and let's get to the good stuff. Angel, welcome to the show.
Hi. So nice to be here on your podcast. Thank you for inviting me.
A little pod time between the girls. I'm so excited to have you on. This is obviously a long time coming. Everyone knows we met like a year ago. It's just life. We both got married in that time. I just had a baby. Yeah, we both had businesses. We were just talking about continuing ed, that we're like continuing ed addicts, you guys. Like, we're always trying to seek out new knowledge, and it's like a problem how far we're willing to travel and how much we're willing to spend to go get new knowledge or like to attend like conferences and stuff. So just a little tidbit about us. But Angel, I don't want to delay the conversation because I know everyone in the intro and just this topic in general is a very charged, emotional topic. Everyone has big feelings about it, but what I find often is missing from the conversation is two pieces: actual experience and then what the data says. More so what the data doesn't say, but we know that just because the data doesn't say it's safe, it doesn't mean it's harmful. It may, but we don't have the data that says that either. And vaginal birth after 2 C-sections is like such a thing for people, but then to do it at home, they're like, "Oh my, you did what?" And you're like, "Yeah, okay. Take a break. Let's pause. Tell us, I think let's start with your birth story, and then we can go into society's responses and reactions to you and like maybe some challenges you've faced and how you actually wrapped your head around that idea. But what was your birth like? Tell us about your prenatal care and what led you to this decision, and actually maybe how you came to have 2 C-sections as well.
So let's take it all the way back because I have 6 kids. So I have a variety of different birth experiences, actually. My first one was, I feel like, your standard cascade of interventions. I'm sure your audience is probably very familiar with that term. So my first one, she was a vaginal delivery. Luckily, I'm surprised and happy that it didn't end in a C-section because it did come up at one point, and I was like, so no, I'm going to push as hard as I can. So that doesn't happen. And the thing with that birth, I feel like it was one of the births that set me on a trajectory of being interested in childbirth and things like that. And it didn't even start the way that I wanted to. My plan, I was very young. I was 19 years old when I got pregnant. And so my thought process was like, I'd just go in and have a baby, and I wanted to do it natural and just expecting being able to walk around the hospital and things like that. None of that happened. I literally got there, was on a monitor, laid in bed the whole time, and they put me on Pitocin after a certain point, and I was on that for a long time and ended up getting a fever, which they said it was an infection, but it was probably the epidural that I had for over 24 hours. So that's that birth. And then after that, I got pregnant with my second child, my daughter, and I had a placenta previa with her For anyone that doesn't know what that means, placenta previa means that your placenta is covering either partially or totally your cervix. And with that kind of delivery, if it doesn't move, you have to have a C-section because there's that possibility of like hemorrhaging. It's one of those types of thing that I'm like all for like natural birth and unmedicated delivery, but it's like one of those things where you have this is a C-section is required. I had a placenta previa. It was only a partial, and I actually started to bleed, which can happen sometimes with the placenta previa. Now, this is a part where it gets a little bit interesting because after I started to bleed, I went to the hospital because they told me if I bled at all to come into the hospital. So I came in. They got me on the monitors. I was on the monitors for observation, and my bleeding started to stop. And they told me, okay, if you start having labor contractions and if the bleeding gets worse, then we're gonna take you in for a C-section. And I was at 31 weeks, 31 weeks. So this we were talking possibility of a premature baby. And I'm like, okay, my bleeding slows down, but then they start coming in. Do you feel contractions? And I'm like, no, not really. And they're like, okay, if you do start to feel contractions, just know we might have to do a C-section and she'll be premature and things like that. They told me what that would be like. I'm like, okay. And then I would say several hours later, they come in and they're like, okay, here, sign this paper, sign this. We're going to take you in for a C-section. We're going to hook you up to magnesium. And I'm just like, wait, how did we go from this might be a possibility to we doing this now? Wait a minute, hold on. And I didn't have a doula at that time. And it would have been nice because maybe I could have even avoided that C-section. I probably could have had her a little bit later in time, but so I ended up with a C-section with her at 31 weeks. So she was premature. She was in the NICU for 4 weeks. That delivery was, that C-section for me was really difficult. I didn't really know what to expect for a C-section. And I ended up, my blood pressure started to drop. I got really sick. I got nauseous. I didn't like being on my back the whole time. It was just not a good time. So I was like, okay, the next baby that I have, I definitely don't want to do this again. No C-section. So I get pregnant with my third, planned VBAC delivery with him actually, my son. And again, I have another placenta previa. And it's just like, no. And they're telling me like, okay, if it moves, then you can have that vaginal delivery. And I'm like, okay, cool, great. So again, it was a partial planning for that vaginal delivery. And I actually started bleeding pretty early in my pregnancy with him. I think I started bleeding with him when I was about like 20 weeks, 21 weeks. I started bleeding with him. And I was really scary because at that point, they're like, if you go into labor, there's like literally nothing we can do. And I'm like, oh man. Thankfully, the bleeding stopped and I was able to continue my pregnancy. However, at 31 weeks, I started to bleed very heavily. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking that my water actually broke, but it wasn't water. It was lots of blood. I had my two girls with me, and keep in mind, I was a single parent at this point. It was a real struggle. So I had to take my two girls with me to the hospital, and I had to like call friends. I actually called my pastor's wife to come grab like one of my kids and things like that. And I rem this was my most traumatic birth ever. Like it was extremely traumatic. The doctor there was telling me like, "Oh, I can't really find his heartbeat." And the nurse was like, "No, I'm pretty sure that's the mom's heartbeat." And this doctor seemed a little lost because he'd be like, I don't know, what are we gonna do? He would just my I'm like, why does he seem so confused? What is going on? And so he left the room and the nurse took the Doppler and she found my son's heartbeat, which is obviously a relief. I'm like, okay, great. He's doing okay in there. And they're telling me like, oh, you have to have a C-section, another C-section. And I was terrified. I was so scared. I thought I was gonna die. I thought my son was gonna die, like just bleeding and having to have a C-section. And I didn't like the last one. I remember being on the OR table and I just had this panic moment, but like in the calmest way possible. I like looked around the room and I told the staff, I'm like, you know what? I don't think I can do this today. I can't do this. So I literally start to turn around and get off the OR. That is the terror I'm feeling. I tried to get off the OR table and they're like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I'm just like, I was so scared. And so there was this, I wish I knew this nurse's name, but she was able to really calm me down and tell me that it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay. And I remember her just stroking my eyebrows, just trying to calm me down. And it worked so well. And I really wish that I could remember her name. And they told me too that because usually typically the boys don't do as well at when they're this early. So he might not even cry and things like that. And when he was born, he cried. I was so relieved. It was a nice sound to hear. Like, okay, he's okay. And they got him into an isolette, and they actually had to transfer him to another hospital because this hospital didn't have a level 4 NICU. So he had to be transferred. And then I lost a lot of blood, so I had to be transferred with him. We both were transferred to a nearby hospital, and I had to get a blood transfusion. And he actually ended up doing very well. He only stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. He was on room air within 24 hours. And the only thing he really needed to do was just gain weight. He did so amazing after that. So that was my two C-sections. That's how I got it. And it was interesting. It was a really scary journey for sure. But I knew that when I got pregnant with my fourth, I definitely wanted to have another vaginal delivery. Like I wanted to go for it. My deliveries were very complicated in a variety of different ways. Obviously, I've had a vaginal birth before. And then I had two placenta previas that required a C-section. With my fourth one, it was like, I don't really see a reason why you can't have a vaginal birth because you've had one before and you don't have a placenta previa this time. Let's go for it. And with her birth, number four, I was able to get my vaginal delivery. And that one was super interesting because they actually thought that I had a placenta accreta, more placental issues or concerns and things like that with her. And so they wanted to do another C-section, but I was able to work with another doctor at another hospital who was very VBAC friendly. And we were able to come up with a plan on how to have this vaginal delivery. And so I want your audience to know if you want to have a VBAC, the value of a second opinion or a third or a fourth opinion is extremely valuable. And it does take a lot of research and determination and things like that. But I was able to get that feedback because I was able to work with a different provider from another hospital, and he worked in conjunction with my provider at my hospital. And I was actually going to have a C-section, and in the middle of them trying to prepare for it, my doctor calls and he's actually, nope, we're going to do a different plan. She's going to get an induction. We're going to set up the induction. This is how last minute that was. Like, we're like, no, he literally called me the day of my C-section. He's, I'm going to call your doctor and we're going to figure out something because I had to plan C-section that day. And then literally, as they were setting me up, they called the staff and they're like, actually, no, cancel that. We're going to do an induction and we'll let you know when that is. Yeah. So that was number four. So very interesting delivery. She ended up doing fine. I didn't bleed or anything. The placenta came out in all one piece. It was a really good delivery. She did very well. So that was my first vaginal delivery after two C-sections. And then I had number five, and they thought she was IUDR. And so like I felt like every pregnancy, I'm like, you guys keep finding something wrong with me. And she ended up not being IUDR at all. I actually went 1 week with her. Typically, if they suspect an IUDR baby, they want to deliver at 37 weeks. But my intuition was telling me, no, this is everything. I just had this intuitive thought and feelings that it was fine, like she was fine. And I asked a lot of questions, like why they felt like she was IUGR, and actually did a podcast episode on IUGR because things with ultrasounds and things like that can sometimes make things a little bit weird. But she ended up not being IUGR at all either. I had her in under 2 hours and she ended up doing really well and fine. And I was at the hospital. After that, I told my husband, and I'm like, I don't want to do another hospital birth. I'm sick of these hospitals. And not only am I sick of the hospitals because they're always trying to find something wrong with me, I hated the postpartum aspect when they're like constantly knocking on your door. Hey, let me just check your blood pressure. Let me just take a picture of your baby. Can you sign this form? And I'm like, I really just want to sleep. Stop knocking on my door. I really want to sleep. So I told my husband I wanted to do a home birth, and he was totally for it. So I feel really blessed that he was just like, yeah, sure, whatever you want. I know you know what you're doing. So we decided to do a home birth after the two C-sections. So the fun part of that was finding a midwife who'd be comfortable with it. And I'd already worked as a doula with a variety of different midwives in the area and talked with a lot of different ones. And so I already knew who I wanted to be my midwife. And I asked her, I'm like, hey, would you be comfortable delivering me at home, even though I've had two C-sections? And she's, yeah, for sure. Now, disclaimer, Ohio doesn't have any regulations for home birth midwives. Depending on your state and the regulations for home birth midwives, some home birth midwives may not legally be able to take moms that are VBACs after two C-sections. In my area in Ohio, which is where I live, there aren't any regulations for home birth midwives. It's a little bit different if you're a certified nurse midwife doing home births. That's a little bit different, but for the home birth traditional midwives and CPMs, there aren't any regulations with that. They're trying, unfortunately, but that's a whole nother it's a whole nother story. But so she was able and comfortable to do my vaginal birth after two C-sections. And with that, my care, I decided to do co-care with one of the local midwives here, certified nurse midwives with the hospital. So I decided to do co-care. Part of that was because I wanted to make sure, since I've had placental concerns in the past, I definitely wanted to make sure that everything was okay with my placenta. One of the things that I wanted to look out for was making sure, of course, I didn't have a placenta previa, but also making sure that my placenta wasn't on my uterine scar. So it wasn't going to affect that either. And it wasn't. I did have an interior placenta, but it wasn't on my scar, so that's really good. So I did co-care with the hospital midwives for a little bit, and I did it mostly to cut down on costs a little bit. My insurance covered a lot of the labs that I needed and things like that. So I was able to do that. But then when I was with my hospital midwife, they were telling me like, okay, we think that you should go to high risk maternal fetal medicine. And I'm just like, why? And they're like, you have a uterine anomaly, and that can cause issues with the babies and like stillbirth and IUDR and things like that. And I was like, my baby seems to be growing well, and my placenta is anterior. So what's the concern? And they're just like, just in case. And I was just like, oh no, see, we're not going to do the just in case. We're not going to do that. No, I'm good. No. So if she's growing well, and I actually told her, and I had a really nice hospital midwife, actually. Obviously they have protocols and things like that. So she had to refer to MFM. But, and I told her, I'm like, look, you guys have told me things in the past that were possibly wrong with me or my babies, and it ended up not being true. Obviously, minus the placenta previas. And she's just, I know. And I was just like, what's the chances of her being stillborn with a uterine anomaly? And she's honestly, I don't know. So I give her credit. She was very honest. And I can have the OBGYN call you and answer that question and things like that. And I'm just like, no, I'm okay. So actually, after that, I decided to just do all my prenatal care with my home birth midwife. And so that is how I got to wanting a VBAC vaginal birth after two C-sections at home. I'm gonna take a breath to see if you have any questions.
I definitely do. So before we hear your VBA2C at home, I want to ask a couple questions about your previous birth. So
Okay.
your story for me is such a beautiful intersection of the data we have and the data we don't have. You have had one vaginal delivery, which is a great indicator that you're a candidate for VBAC. Yes, you should VBAC. But wait a minute, because we don't really know that much about VBA2C, although the data that we do have, it's new, it's upcoming, it hasn't made it everywhere. Everyone's not going to accept new data right off the bat. So there's obviously some lags in there, but the data that we do have is suggesting that it's a good option for people. We can see where that might be a problem. Home birth is another thing where the data is just, where does it fall? For some of us, it's very clear. Home birth is the right choice for most people. Midwifery care is the right choice for most people. You got a lot of naysayers out there for that as well. So for me, your story is such a good example of how you cannot just rely on the medical model of care. You cannot just rely on the evidence that we do have that is published. You can't just make a decision. Well, I guess you as the patient, you can just make a decision out of like spiritual or like beliefs, but as medical professionals, we can't just consider a spiritual or a belief approach. It is so multifaceted, and your story kind of encompasses all of that. It is really an individual experience, and it must be treated as that. And you're going to have stories like this that are intricate. There are many, many puzzle pieces that really need to meticulously fit together in order to get the outcome that we're trying to get. And oh my gosh, I love that so much. I love it so much because so many times we think about birth as this cookie cutter thing, or we just go into the hospital and this is what it's going to be like. A lot of people think, okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to have a baby, and the next day I'm going to have my people over, and the next day I'm going to go to postpartum, and then I'm going to stay a couple nights. I'm going to go home. It's going to be great. And honey, that ain't the experience. Even with really great births, that reality is usually not what people experience. And gosh, I just love to highlight the stories where it's okay, you need to think about how all of your factors are going to overlap. So, my first question is, how far away were you from your hospital?
So I was 25 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, depending on traffic, away
Sure.
from my hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
in your first birth, the way that they just put you on the bed,
Hmm.
didn't let you up. You didn't have a lot of mobility. Things went really awry, but you also didn't really know how to stop that train from leaving the station. What led us there? Were you advocating for yourself and being denied that support, or did you just have no clue how to even stop it and discussions were not being had in terms of your options?
Yeah, so definitely the latter. I was very young, 19.
Mm,
I didn't take a childbirth class, and I feel like if I had taken a childbirth class, I really would have known more about what my options were.
yeah.
Obviously, I just had the only childbirth experience I had was in the movies, and I just expected, oh, I'd just walk in and just do everything that I could. And then I didn't really advocate for myself. I didn't know that I could. I didn't know that I had. And honestly, I feel like one of the big things is that I didn't know what to ask either. I think that's pretty much why it went the way that it went and not the way that I hoped it would go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of traumas from your previous births did you take into your VBAC? Was there ever a question for you where you were like scared of, oh my gosh, can I do this? I've had three births and two of them have ended in a C-section for a reason that my body needed. Like, how did that impact the beliefs around your body, or even maybe the self-talk that you experienced going into that birth?
Yeah, so there was a lot of different things that I experienced. I know, so immediately after my C-sections, and I feel like this is not really talked about, especially when we're talking about premature births,
Mm,
is that I felt like my body had failed me. I felt incomplete. I felt like a part of my pregnancy wasn't completed. And it was a very interesting feeling. And again, I so wish a doula would have came and a lot of and handy in this part postpartum, but it just felt so incomplete, and I felt like my body had failed me in that moment. And then with my subsequent births, there was always just like this fear hanging around. Every time I went to the OB office or the midwifery office, oh my gosh, what if I can't? What if they find something? What if they find that I do have a placenta? What if just a lots of what ifs, just a lot of fear surrounding what if they won't let me do this? What if they find something wrong with me again? So that was a lot of the fears that I had coming into my births. And then as far as like delivery, when I actually started my vaginal birth, I felt pretty confident in the beginning laboring. And actually, with my first VBAC, I had just finished my doula training. I had taken my doula training 2 months prior. I was armed with like new information, still a pretty brand new doula, but I felt pretty confident. That's where I feel education is so important, especially when we're talking about VBACs. And figuring out what happened in your previous birth that kind of led to that cascade. Now, in my situation, my two C-sections were unavoidable, but I did learn about a lot about what happened in my first birth that I could have avoided. Now, with my fourth baby, now that actually, even though I had my VBAC, that actually there was some trauma there. And so this is my first VBAC after two C-section. So honestly, I didn't have that great of a doula. Um, my doula was not great. And I think part of the reason was because she was afraid to advocate on my behalf. And I feel like this is a common theme with newer doulas and some doula organizations not allowing doulas to really just speak up for their client.
Yep.
But I remember them pushing an epidural, and this is also pretty common with VBACs, is that they'll say, yeah, you can do a VBAC, and then they want you to get induced, or they want you to have an epidural while you're VBACing, which we all know that an epidural can actually increase that risk of having another repeat C-section. I remember denying the epidural, but they kept coming back trying to convince me, and I'm just like, I will let you know when I want it, if I want it, and I don't want it. But I remember being on the Pitocin, it was extremely painful. And that was the first time since my first daughter that I was on Pitocin. And it was so extremely painful. And I remember pretty much panicking because the contractions were like one on top of another. And I remember begging them to turn it off, and they wouldn't turn it off. And my doula's sitting in the corner just watching it all happen. And I just remember, please just turn it off. And at one point, it was so uncomfortable. I remember just feeling I wanted to crawl out of my body to escape it. And I remember I was like repeating myself over and over again, just trying to figure out a way to cope. And one of the nurses was like, why does she keep saying the same thing over and over again? Okay, this nurse was not okay. Yes, this was a horrible nurse and just making fun of me as I tried to cope with these contractions. So I did end up getting an epidural with my fourth one just because it was so uncomfortable, so painful. The contractions were just one on top of another, and it was just awful. Now, and I also remember telling them, oh, after I got the epidural, I could feel her starting to come out, and they didn't believe me at all. I remember telling them, I think her head is coming out. And they're just like, oh, it's okay, fine. We'll be in there in a little bit. And then when they finally got me, they wanted me to deliver in the OR. When they finally got me delivered, her head was coming out. I pushed her out in two pushes, and she was here. So that fourth VBAC was still rough, I will say for sure. But I learned a lot from that. And then my second and third VBAC after two C-sections were so much better. Yeah.
It's really hard to have a good birth when the people around you aren't supportive and just clearly don't know anything about birth or the type of birth that you want. They were probably very well trained nurses in the medical aspect of birth and how to medically manage or how to manage emergent situations in birth, which is largely their training and the lens that they often look through. For someone who was looking for an unmedicated, very hands-off experience, that was normal. Mantras are normal. Saying the same thing for literally hours. I cannot tell you how many hours I have sat there and said, That was a great one. Take a deep breath. You don't have to do that again for a little bit. Melt into the bed. And then here comes the next one, and you say, okay, take a deep breath. You can do this. And then you just wait for every contraction. I'm saying that for hours, right? It's so normal, but you have to know that's normal. And so if you are in a space where the people don't know that, or they just don't care, which sometimes is unfortunately the case, it's hard. It's really hard to be able to tap into that place of confidence and that place of trust in birth and that place of surrender. You have to let go. You can't try and stay present in birth. That's not how birth is supposed to work. You are supposed to go into a deeper level and birth your baby. This is an experience. This is not an event in your life. It's not something that you just show up to, you do and you go home. Like this is something you're going to go through. You will be a different human when you come on the other side of birth. When we see you the next time in your conscious mind, you can be a different person, sister. It's come on, dig deep and really put together that team that's good. Yeah. Was there any piece of you thought to or knew to or wanted to ask for new nurses? Did you know that was an option? Obviously, it wasn't offered to you. That's not something that's going to be offered to you, but did it ever cross your mind?
No, it did not really cross my mind with that fourth one. It didn't. And honestly, and interestingly enough, after I got my epidural, I did actually get a different nurse. So I don't know what happened and why I got a different nurse at that time period. But that new nurse was actually very sweet. She did a great job. She actually let us take photos, and she's not technically
Supposed
we're
to.
not supposed to, but yeah, she's if you bring out your phone, I didn't see it. So
Who am I to tell you what to take a picture
exactly.
of? Here's the
Yes.
policy. When I
Yeah.
leave, I don't know what I
Yeah.
don't see. That's
Exactly.
hilarious. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. Look, a good nurse is everything. It
Hmm.
just really is. A good nurse that is really your advocate and truly there to prioritize whatever your goals are and to make you feel safe and to help you make decisions that make you feel good,
Yeah.
heard,
Hmm.
cared for. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So, in your later pregnancies, when you said, oh no, we ain't going down that whole like, oh, no way, put it in park, I'm getting off this ride. Where did that come from? How did you learn to tap into that intuition, into that confidence, into that place of, wait a friggin' minute, I don't think we're doing this. And you know what? I am actually going to say no because it seems like in your previous burst, maybe saying no or maybe knowing your options had been a little bit tough.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like as I've gotten older, I have learned to come and trust my intuition. And I hear this talked about a lot is that we are told that we shouldn't listen to our intuition. We're told that it's a lie. And if you don't listen to whatever this provider is telling you and listen to them, then, the worst thing can happen. And there was in each birth, I listened to my intuition a little bit differently, and it actually strengthened my confidence in believing my intuition because there were always little things where something in my it was and I love this, but having a whole body yes to certain situations where there are also situations where you'll have a whole body no, absolutely not, do not do this. I can't even describe it, but it's literally in the core of you and it's just like screaming, don't do this. And I listen to that. So I may not have always done the whole body yes, but I definitely listened to my whole body no's. And there were just things that would come up in each birth where that no, that screaming, that intuition telling me not to do certain things would come into play and I would listen to it. And I didn't really know what that was at first. And then as I've grown into this work as a birth doula and a childbirth educator, I've come to recognize what that was. And so with each baby, I leaned into it a little bit more. So,
I love that. I'm like nodding my head for our listeners that aren't watching along. I'm like, yeah, that's so similar to my story. I've always been a very intuitive person and I've always had these very strong gut instincts, but I have found that as I've gotten older. In some regards, they've gotten much, much stronger, and I'm able to identify them right off the bat. Yes, that's what that is. Yes, I should do this. Hell no, I should not do this. That feeling right there just told me I shouldn't even thought about it. I'm so into, and then there are some things that have actually gotten hazier as I've gotten older. And I'm like, now what is that? What is that? Is that intuition because it's new, or have I unlocked some sort of new anxiety that I actually need to like work through? Which is both awesome because I love personal growth, but also frustrating and annoying because damn, does it ever end? Am I ever gonna get there? Woo, what? How long are we gonna be working on this project? Forever? Okay.
Yeah. And also too, I think it's important, something that I've grown to learn and through, especially through like my faith, is that if you have peace about something, it probably is something that you should do. So if you, and I tell this to my clients, if you are uncertain about something, if you don't have that whole body yes, if you don't have that whole body no, that probably means you need to ask more questions. So I take into account of those options as well. So if I don't know for sure, okay, then I need to ask more questions, or I need to go deeper into whatever the situation is and investigate. But having peace about a situation and just like this relief when you make the decision, it probably was the best decision for you as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, maybe we should hear about your actual VBA2C at home now. So can you share that birth story with us?
Yeah, so that was fun. You don't really say that about birth, but I like it was nice. With my home birth, I did a lot of my prenatal care with my midwife at home. With the second half of my pregnancy, I did a lot of it at home. And the nice thing about it was I was able to have my kids. Now I have 6 kids, and trying to find a babysitter for 6 kids is a challenge. Those are the other motivator to have a home birth as well. So the really cool thing about that was feeling like I could just go home and be with my family and have my family there and not have to worry about my kids. And so it all started. I remember I was having some prodromal labor a few days prior, where around midnight, I would start to have some frequent contractions. And that would happen for about 30 minutes, and then it would space out and then teeter off. And then the next night, it happened again. And I remember texting my friend. Obviously, I've had 6 kids, guys, but though you still have questions and you still worry about things and second guess yourself too, which is why I think if you're a doula or a childbirth educator, you should still have a doula if that's something that you're comfortable with. But I remember texting my friend like, "Oh, I'm so upset. Like my body is having these contractions and I'm still not having my baby and I'm so pissed." And she's just like, it's okay. You're gonna have your baby soon. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. And so later that day, it's so funny because I got a text from my sister-in-law, and it was at 7:50, and she texted me and she said, "Oh, I'm just waiting for my water broke text." And I like texted her and I'm like, "Oh yeah, we'll see." I kid you guys not, at 8 o'clock, my contraction started. It wild. And I was actually at my husband's parents' house, and I was playing a card game with my niece, and I started to feel tightness around my bladder. I was going to the bathroom a lot, but I was like really trying to distract myself and not really think about the contractions. And then finally, I couldn't really distract myself from it anymore. And so I called my husband, who was downstairs, and I'm like, yeah, I think it's time to go. Now, we didn't tell his parents that we were doing a home birth because his mom worries a lot, and she's more into the traditional model of care, doing hospitals and things like that. And I knew if she knew, she would try to come over and she would worry the whole. We didn't tell them that we were going home because my labor had started, but his dad told us later that he knew what was going on, which is so funny.
Also, he knew his wife.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yep, he does. Now this is really interesting, and this showed me how mental birth can be. We got all our stuff, so we got the kids and we went out the door and we started to leave. And then I got to his car and I'm just like, okay. And I had the biggest contraction at that moment. The biggest contraction, like leaning on his Jeep. Okay. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we gotta go home. So I get in the car and I'm texting my doula, hey, like I'm having contractions and this really hurts. And she's okay, just keep me updated and stuff like that. And how far are your contractions? And I don't time my contractions. I'm just like, I don't know. They're like every 5 minutes. I don't know. And so I timed them for her. And they were a little, when I got into the car, they actually spaced out. So I had maybe one or two during the 10-minute car ride. And as soon as we hit the driveway of our house, I had another big contraction. It was just like so wild. And so I got out of the car and then I had another contraction. And then as I got into the house, another contraction. So then my contractions started to come in pretty regularly. And I remember sitting on my birth ball and something felt a little off with the contractions. And I remember texting my doula, like, oh, yeah, these kind of feel a little bit strange because of where the contractions were happening. So we both decided that we're going to do a mile circuit. So we did a mile circuit, and that got my contractions to a very regular pattern. They were my entire belly. It felt normal. So I'm like, okay. So my doula comes over and I talk to my midwife and I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm having the contractions and she's, well, how far apart are they? And I'm just like, I don't know. And then I told her, I'm like, hold on a second. I'm having a contraction right now. And then she's, yep, I'm on my way. And I'm like, are you sure I just started. You can take your time. She's, no, I'm on my way. I'm coming there right now. And probably about an hour in, I'm in the shower and my 2-year-old is with me in the shower. And I just remember her just telling me, like, it's okay, mommy. Just breathe, mommy. You're doing good. And she's two, guys. It was so cute. I loved it. And then she would touch my belly and she's, is baby okay? And I'm like, yeah, baby's okay. And she's, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, mommy's okay. She's okay. And so she would sit literally right on the edge of the tub, just staying by me. She wouldn't let me out. She wouldn't let me out of her sight. And then I got into the shower. I showered for a few minutes, and then after a certain point, I was like, "Ah, this is not it anymore." And then I went into my daughter's room, and I remember did have a moment of doubt. In that moment, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what did I just get myself into?" And literally not long after that, and oh, I had this thought of, oh man, I don't think I can do this. And I didn't want to say this out loud because I felt if I said that out loud, literally everyone would have told me, like, yes, you can. And I didn't want to hear that. Yeah. So after that, not long after that, I started to push, and she came out within 2 or 3 pushes. And my water broke at the same time as I started to push. And my 2-year-old is, oh, mommy. And then I had our daughter and it was wonderful. It was beautiful. And yeah, that was my birth. It was very fast. It was about 3 hours from start to finish. So it was very
Wow.
fast birth. Yeah.
Yeah, a true precipitous labor. And how was your bleeding after this birth and your midwifery care directly after birth? Were you she seems very hands-off during your labor. Was she
Yeah.
the right amount of hands-on in terms of management after birth, which obviously some is
Yeah.
necessary, but in terms of consent and stuff, was it all just groovy?
Yeah, so actually during our prenatal care, I let her know, I'm like, I just want you to be a fly on the wall. I'm like, I
Nice.
don't want any cervical checks, none at all. Please don't check me. And I don't
Don't
want to
even
be in your,
offer.
I don't want to be in your vagina, girl.
Yeah.
We're good. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. And so I let her know my plan. I didn't really want her to do a lot of hands-on stuff, just be on the fly on the wall. And she did great. I didn't really notice that she was there at all. She came in, made sure I had eaten something. She's like, when was the last time you ate? And she gave me some food. And then they checked the baby's heart rate a couple of times or a few times, I don't remember, but she did amazing just being very hands off with my labor. And that's what I wanted. And she did great prenatally too. She suggested a lot of things like different teas and nutrition and things like that, which I love because I'm very huge into herbal remedies and homeopathic medicine and things like that. And she was great with that. And after delivery, they got me nice and comfortable in the bed and they fed me after. That was awesome. Like they went in my kitchen, made me some eggs and bacon, and then it was good. That was the best postpartum meal ever. They cleaned me off. They cleaned up my whole house. It was nice. It was very good. You just don't get that kind of care at the hospital, especially like postpartum meal and things like that. Like the food isn't all that great. Or if you have a baby in the middle of the night, there's nothing open and stuff like that. It was really nice to have that. And I really wanted to do skin to skin with my baby for an hour before they did anyways and stuff like that. And she respected that. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. Definitely different from the hospital. And the best part was I got to sleep after. No one was coming
In
in
your
telling
own
me.
bed.
Exactly. It was so nice. They set up my bathroom with like pads and herbs for sitz bath and everything. It was fantastic.
10 stars. That's awesome. That
Yeah.
is awesome. Yeah, it can be really dreamy like that in home birth. I think a lot of people aren't aware that home birth can be like that. A lot of people are, but I think the majority of the US really thinks of home birth as this maybe like, I don't know, a rogue experience. Not, I don't know, rogue doesn't feel like the right word. Just something that's a little taboo-ish. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but so many,
Risky. They think it's risky and
yeah,
dangerous. And I don't know. I think what I noticed the biggest fear with home birth is just what if an emergency happens?
yeah.
And I think midwives are well trained in seeing warning signs and things like that and getting you in before anything really happens. And having a good backup plan after for your home birth too is really important. Which hospital are you going to go to? If we have several hospitals in our area, we're just like, okay, if I want an epidural, which hospital am I going to? Okay. If it's an emergency, which hospital am I going to? Because I do have quite a few more options in the area that I live in. So having that good backup plan is, of course, super important. And I specialize with helping moms with having their VBAC and stuff. And prenatally, making sure your nutrition is good. And I did lots of chiropractic care. I did pelvic floor therapy, exercise. All of that can increase the success of your VBAC. And it also not only does it increase the success, but it just keeps you healthy throughout your pregnancy. It just lowers the risk of complications in your pregnancy and lowers your risk of complications afterwards as well.
I want to hear a little bit more about VBAC prep. So, what else did you do? And since you specialize in it and that's your focus area with the people that you serve, what else do you tell clients to do in order to not necessarily promise a VBAC, but at least sway the cards in your favor?
Yeah, yeah. So for depending on the situation, education is really important. So understanding, like I said, what happened in your previous birth. So I do a lot of chat about what happened in the previous birth and what are the fears that you have happening again. And if these situations do happen again, what are we going to do about it? And then also doing some, when we create the birth plan, like creating that a C-section plan as well, just in case we do have to have a C-section, making sure that it is that gentle C-section as possible. And that helps relieve a lot of fears, like, okay, at least if I do have to have a C-section, at least it'll be a nice one or at least a peaceful one. But yeah, so I did lots of nutrition. So my favorite book to read about nutrition is Real Food for Pregnancy by Lily Nichols. I love her book and
Same.
highly recommend it because there's just so many complications linked to poor nutrition when it comes to pregnancy. So looking at that, and then my midwife actually recommended some herbs to help with like iron and liver that are just like because first of all, those iron supplements they give you is just so awful.
Mhm.
So she had me do stinging nettle and dandelion leaf, and I like to use, oh my gosh, Earthly has nourish her naturally, which is really good. It has a lot of the stinging nettles and dandelion, red raspberry leaf. So I also did red raspberry leaf as well during my pregnancy. Pilates, I did Pilates during my pregnancy as well because it just helps with pelvic floor strength. I'm not really into yoga, so I felt like Pilates was a good alternative for me. And it's something that my pelvic floor therapist actually recommended as well to help with the pelvic floor strength in your pelvic region in general. Walking, spitting babies is really helpful. Doing the three balances can help bring balance to your body because depending on what happened into your previous birth, maybe baby was asynclitic for some reason, maybe there was twists in your uterus. So doing spinning babies three balances can be really helpful with preventing birth complications as well.
I always love to add in chiropractic care to that as
Mhm.
well. So as
Yes.
you are working on your pelvic floor physical on your pelvic floor with your physical therapist, a lot of times you'll be working with your scar as well to break up that scar tissue and
Mhm.
do exactly what you say, balance that pelvis a little bit more. Chiropractic care will work right alongside that and really in conjunction with that as you unwind and break up scar tissue or really tense muscles or twisted muscles, your body will need to be reset and chiropractic care will do that. So what you'll do is you will release some tension, your body will have some new range of motion and then your chiropractor will set your spine and your body back into space. They don't actually move muscles, but they're adjusting your body in terms. I go to the chiropractor and I love it. I'm a big fan. And I just believe that for a VBAC, someone who's prepping to VBAC, you really need to be focusing on making your pelvis balanced because we know that a lot of feedbacks that end up in another C-section, a lot of times it is just because that baby gets stuck in there. And that could in part be due to the way that your body has healed back from previous C-sections.
Yes, 100% chiropractic care is definitely one of those things that I also recommend, and it was one of the things that I also did
Mm.
in my pregnancy as well. And not only does it help with the preparation of delivery, it helps a lot with any pregnancy discomfort. So it's fun.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Big fan of that. Okay, now I have like two controversial questions that you've toed around, but I really do. I'd love to hear. I want to chat about it. How do you feel about regulations for home birth midwifery?
Oh, yeah. I so 100% am against it. I just feel
Mm,
like it limits women's choices because women should have the ability to choose what kind of midwife they want. And if they want to have a VBAC after C-section with a midwife that is comfortable with doing so, she should have the ability to do. And when we have regulations come in, a lot of times these midwives, they can't take a VBAC after two C-sections. They can't do breech babies. They can't care for a mom after 41 or 42 weeks. And then she's got to go to an OB who doesn't understand. Not, I can't say all OBs, but a lot of them just don't understand how to do physiological birth or unmedicated deliveries and things like that. And so moms are just left with a choice of going to the OB or doing a free birth, which I'm very neutral with free birth. If you feel like you want to do free birth, go ahead, girl. Like,
do you
but
think?
it is there's just a long history of midwifery was always something that women did. And I feel like it is a woman's right to have a choice in how she wants to deliver her baby. And that includes like some things that some providers may feel is risky, but if she feels like she understands the risks and has that whole body yes about it, then she should have that choice. And the government shouldn't be telling her that she can't. That's how I feel about it, and I'm hoping Ohio will stay out of that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of pushback on that, and not only with midwifery, but with doulas as well. And unfortunately, it's so sad.
Yeah. Are you guys finding you're finding a lot of pushback and regulation on doulas in Ohio specifically, or are you speaking nationally?
With Ohio specifically, for sure, they're trying to have the Ohio Board of Nursing oversee a doula
Wow.
certification, putting in, they have a draft currently where they're talking about giving doulas a certificate to practice in Ohio. It is not going well here. They're really trying to take control over the whole situation and control doulas and
Localize them. Doulas
yes,
should not
exactly.
be governed by a board made up of medical professionals.
Exactly.
We are not medical professionals. We are adjacent to that. We work
Mhm.
collaboratively with the medical team, but we shouldn't be governed by that. Wow. I'm super bothered by that. The little fire inside me says, "Hee go!
Yes.
Go
Oh
see what's
yeah.
going on in Ohio." I cannot take that on right now. I really
I'm
just cannot.
I'm trying
But
my best to like
yeah,
really, I've got a petition that I set up. I've sent it to the Ohio Board of Nursing. I'm trying to attend the meetings that they try to do on the down low. They have a doula advisory board that they have just for show. They don't actually take any advice from them, but yeah, it's not going too well, but it's going into effect at least doulas who want to accept Medicaid and want to be certified with the state, that goes into effect in September. The certificate to practice is, and it's in draft right now. So, yeah.
So how can people support your efforts if they are feeling like this may be not the right road for doulas in Ohio?
So I feel like that's the $1 million question. I feel like maybe just calling the senators in Ohio and just really just telling them like, hey, this isn't right. This is an invasion of women's rights, signing the petition. I'm still trying to figure out other ways to advocate for our freedom to just not be a part of the government and have the government control what we do because it just limits our ability to support and advocate for our clients. The hospitals are very excited about it, and they're really trying to also create their own doula programs within the hospitals and get nurses as certified doulas and have their own certification program. And I feel like COVID was the beginning when they started to tell doulas, well, you can't come in unless you're a certified doula and have proof of that. Now, the Ohio Board of Nursing is creating a whole website and list of all the doulas who are certified through them. And I definitely can very much see them saying, look, unless you're on this list, you can't come in here. We shall see.
Yeah, that will definitely be problematic on so many levels.
Hmm.
That'll be a tough bridge if we need to cross that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for
All
sure.
right. I think my last question along those same lines are you have hired a doula before that didn't advocate for you. They didn't
Hmm.
speak with your medical professionals. You felt like they really didn't speak up for the things that you wanted, even though it seemed like maybe they had known what your goals are. How do you feel about slash? What would you say to doulas who are out there who practice like that, who don't speak up, who don't actually do any formal advocating in the birth room? What do you say to them?
Yeah. I feel like we need to stop being bystanders to birth trauma in the hospital room. The whole point of having a doula is for a mom to have that voice because she's in a whole nother world, right? We shouldn't expect pregnant women to just come out of that birthing space, that birthing mindset to advocate for themselves. We need to be protectors of that space along with her partner. And I don't think it's fair to have certain doula organizations to tell their doulas that they can't advocate for their client. It leads to situations like mine where you're just I'm experiencing this trauma and this doula is afraid or just feels like it's not her place to advocate for me. And I just don't think that's fair to the women that we support and the families that we support. And doulas are here to be protectors of the birthing space. And I just hope that we can break free from that fear of advocating for our clients because that's what doulas are for. We're here to advocate for the moms, to speak for her wants and her wishes and things like that. And regulations like what they're doing in Ohio is going to severely impact our ability to advocate for these moms. And unfortunately, some of these doula organizations are hand in hand with the state and the government because they don't want doulas to really advocate. So that's just really unfortunate.
I don't get that. I don't get how a doula organization could not want doulas to be able to advocate. I could absolutely see them working in partnership with hospitals, but it has to be a good doula organization, not one of these sellout organizations. It has to be an organization that actually teaches their doulas to truly understand how to effectively and respectfully communicate in the birth space so that you can advocate for your patient, not to influence or sway them to make certain decisions, but to just ensure that they're getting respectful, evidence based, kind, supportive care. And if they're not, how does that person navigate that? That's really what we want. I will never understand doulas that don't advocate. And I've talked to so many of them. I'm so open to this conversation. And I understand where a lot of them are coming from. I really do. I don't get it. I can see where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, for me, our entire job as a doula is advocacy. Part of that is done through education that we provide to our clients. Part of that is done through advocacy with making sure that policies are fair and up to date and legislation doesn't get really cuckoo crazy. And part of it is done advocating in the birth space, physically and verbally advocating and saying, hey, did we make sure we got consent for this? Hey, can we pause the room? Angel looks really nervous right now. Hey, Angel, did you have any other questions about what Dr. Jones is saying? Hey, I know that we talked about this in your prenatals and we haven't talked about it yet here. Do you want to see if that's an option for this? There's so many places that doulas can effectively advocate and not be adversarial. And I want to get us to that place, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be by answering to a nursing board.
No, no, and it's not. And I 100% agree with you. And I wish these doula organizations would actually teach doulas how to advocate for clients. I definitely think that's a missing pillar in doula trainings. And I actually have, so I have this definition of a doula on my Instagram. You guys can check it out. But what the definition of a birth doula is, and I said it's a prenatal and birth advocate specializing in comfort care during labor and physiological birth. They're knowledgeable about the rights of childbearing women, the anatomy and physiology of birth, and prenatal and birth related medical procedures, and can guide expecting mothers through the healthcare system. And if you actually look at the definition of what a patient advocate is, it's like reading what a doula is. It's navigating the system. It's clarifying options for mothers. It's getting information and resources to expecting mothers. It's assisting in solving conflicts and crises. It's making sure that her rights are being met. It's helping the mom communicate with her healthcare provider so that they can get all the information they need to make those decisions. And it's also helping guide the expecting moms and their family about different screenings and diagnoses and treatments and the follow-up of a medical condition. That's what a patient advocate is, but that's also what a doula should be doing and that what a doula does. And so I would say that too to doulas that don't believe that doulas should be advocates because we are exactly what we do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could not agree more. Wow, I have loved this conversation. This has been so good. I love covering conversations on here that are going to get people to think deeper, that are going to get people to not necessarily question the system. That's not what I set out to do. But if questions come up, I encourage you to ask them. You deserve to have this information. If this information doesn't bring questions up for you and it is just what it is for you and you take it and you feel more empowered, then awesome for that as well. But if you do have questions and you're like, hey, I wonder if this would be an option for me, or hey, maybe this is my sign from the universe that I should look into VBAC, or oh my gosh, I was just wondering about home birth. How funny that it is in this podcast that I'm listening to. Maybe it's a little nudge from my intuition and from my spirit guides, whatever you believe in, that are telling me to look into home birth. I just really appreciate you being here. I think this conversation I think it was deep, and I think it was a conversation that not a lot of people have access to, not because they don't want to have them, but because not a lot of people are willing to talk about these hard conversations and willing to go here on a lot of topics and willing to talk about the mistakes that they made in the past and how did you make it better going forward and how did you actually tap into that intuition. A lot of people shy away from those conversations, and one of the things that I kind of loved about you from the beginning when I first met you last year was like, wow, she is so real. Like we can just have real conversations. She's such an open book and it was nice. So thank you so much for sharing your awesomeness with our community. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I feel it's such an honor to just be here and just to chat with you. You're amazing. The work that you do is truly amazing. And I love everything that you do. I love all the education you're putting out there. Even when you get pushback, you just kind of power through it and you speak your truth. And I just love it so much. So thank you for being an inspiration for all of us.
Well, thank you. Thanks for everybody for being here. I appreciate it. I wouldn't be anything without all of you guys, without all of our guests and without all of our listeners and the people who request topics and the people who request different guests. This show is truly about you guys. So thanks for all you guys. Angel, if people wanted to connect with you, or maybe they had a vaginal birth after 2 C-sections, or maybe they just had a home birth that was a VBAC, or maybe they're looking into these options or they were interested in your services, they're from Ohio. How can people best connect with you for different things?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram. It's Fruit of the Womb Birth on Instagram. And then you guys can also find my website, fruitofthewombbirth.com. It's 1B because I misspelled it, guys. I'm sorry. And I didn't feel like getting a new URL, fruitofthewombbirth.com. You guys can also find me on my podcast. My podcast is the Birth Rebel Podcast, and I love to talk about controversial topics over there. So if you like controversy, definitely head on over to that side of the podcast world for sure.
I think everyone that listens to this podcast is at least a low-level controversy seeker, just a little bit. We all have that little fire inside of us. All
Yeah.
right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. Be sure to follow Angel on social media, and I'll see you in the next episode. You can find me on social media at Tranquility by HeHe or at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, be sure to head over to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye! Thank you so much for tuning in today. I truly do value this community and I love hanging out with you. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent. It's an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend. Share it with someone who could use evidence-based information to help them have an informed and confident birth. I'd love to hear what you have to say and read your sweet words. By leaving us a review, you are helping other expectant mamas and their families find the podcast so that we can reduce birth trauma and improve maternity care in the U.S. one birth at a time. If you're interested in joining the Birth Lounge, go to thebirthlounge.com. If you want to connect with me on socials, you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe on all platforms. Until next time, stay educated, stay supported, stay confident. Bye!